When my father passed, everyone believed my golden boy brother would inherit it all. But at the reading of the will, one sentence changed everything. He tried to steal my legacy with lies and forged papers, but in the end, the truth stripped him of everything. The church was silent except for the faint echo of the priest's voice. The air smelled of roses and incense, but to me it felt suffocating, heavy, almost poisonous. My father's coffin lay at the front, draped in white lilies, his favorite flower. I sat in the second row, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my body trembling not from grief alone, but from the weight of everything I knew was about to come. Death has a way of pulling families together, or tearing them apart. And in my case, it was both. My older brother Christopher stood near the front, shoulders straight, jaw tight, acting every bit the golden child he had always been. Everyone who looked at him saw pride, strength, the perfect heir to my father's legacy. They whispered things like, he'll take good care of the business, and his father must have been so proud. But as I watched him, I didn't feel pride. I felt a storm of something darker, suspicion, bitterness, maybe even fear. Because for as long as I could remember, Christopher had always believed that everything my father built would one day belong to him. And honestly, so did I. I was the second child, the daughter, the one who always blended into the background. My father loved me, yes, but the world loved Christopher. He had the charm, the charisma, the kind of presence that made people bend toward him like flowers turning toward the sun. I could never compete with that. And yet, as I sat there in the suffocating silence, watching my brother soak in the attention, I kept replaying my father's last words to me, words whispered in weakness, in those final days when he could barely breathe. Victoria, don't be afraid. You'll understand soon. At the time, I didn't know what he meant, but something inside me told me that those words were about to take shape, to reveal themselves in ways none of us expected. Behind me, whispers floated like smoke through the rows of mourners. Some spoke about my father's sudden death, others about the future of the family business. The company wasn't just numbers and contracts. It was his life's work, a multi-million-dollar empire built from nothing but grit and persistence. And everyone assumed Christopher would inherit it. Why wouldn't they? He was the one groomed for it, the one who always sat beside my father in board meetings, while I stayed invisible. As the service ended, people filed out slowly, offering me stiff condolences. Be strong. He loved you dearly. You'll be fine. Your brother will take care of you. Each word cut deeper than the last. Your brother will take care of you. As though I was helpless, as though I was destined to live in his shadow forever. Christopher came to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that looked tender to outsiders, but I knew better. His grip was firm, almost controlling, his smile more for the room than for me. Stay close tomorrow, he said in a low voice, leaning just close enough that only I could hear. The will's being read at noon. Dad left everything in order. You won't have to worry about a thing. There was confidence in his tone, the kind that comes from knowing victory is certain. But for some reason, his words didn't comfort me. They chilled me. Because deep inside, I knew something was coming. Something that would shatter this illusion of control my brother carried so proudly. And as I left the church, walking past the sea of mourners who all looked at me with pity, I whispered to myself, Dad, whatever secret you left behind, I hope I'm strong enough to face it. Little did I know, that secret would turn my world upside down. Do you think family favoritism destroys relationships? The following day, I found myself standing in the grand study of my father's estate, the same room where he had once built an empire, brick by brick, deal by deal. The walls were lined with mahogany shelves stacked with leather-bound books, the smell of aged paper mixing with polished oak. I used to sit on the rug as a child, watching him work at his desk, wondering how one man could command so much power with just his words and his presence. Now, the same room was filled with family, lawyers, and tension so thick it made it hard to breathe. Christopher walked in first, his wife Catherine glued to his side like a trophy on display. She was as polished as ever, pearl earrings, silk blouse, hair pulled back into a neat chignon. She held his arm like she was already the queen of the empire, her chin slightly raised, as though the outcome of this reading was already certain. I sat quietly at the long oak table, my palms pressed flat against its glossy surface to keep them from trembling. I tried not to meet anyone's eyes, but I could feel them on me, curious, sympathetic, pitying. Most probably thought I was here for formality, a token gesture. The daughter who'd be given a sentimental piece of jewelry, while the true crown went to Christopher. The family lawyer, Mr. Anderson, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His presence commanded silence. He was a tall man with gray hair and a measured voice that carried authority. Thank you all for coming, he began. Your father left very clear instructions regarding his estate, and it is my duty to honor his wishes exactly as he intended. Christopher leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced across his chest, his expression smug but patient. Catherine's eyes glittered with anticipation. I held my breath. The lawyer unfolded the document, his voice steady. To my daughter, Victoria, I leave the house, its contents, and the personal belongings within. There were polite nods around the room. I felt Christopher's smirk from across the table. Of course, the house. A lovely gift, but nothing compared to the empire. Mr. Anderson continued. To my son, Christopher. He paused, the silence sharp. I leave a trust of $1 million. Christopher straightened, his smirk widening into a grin. Catherine squeezed his hand, already calculating how that money would fit into their plans. But then, the air shifted. And finally, Mr. Anderson said, his tone deepening as though he knew the weight of what he was about to reveal. To my daughter, Victoria, I leave controlling interest in the family company, as well as the majority of my financial estate, including investments and assets. The room froze. My heart stopped. Christopher's grin faltered, his fingers unclasping slowly as though the words had physically struck him. Catherine's eyes widened, her carefully constructed composure slipping for the first time. A stunned murmur rippled through the relatives seated behind us. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even comprehend what I had just heard. Me? The company? The empire my father had built? The empire Christopher was raised to believe was his birthright? Mr. Anderson folded the paper neatly. These are your father's wishes, signed and witnessed. They cannot be contested without substantial proof of fraud. He looked at me then, his eyes kind. Victoria, he trusted you to carry his legacy forward. I felt every gaze in the room burn into me. Christopher slammed his hand against the table, making several people jump. This is ridiculous, he barked. There must be some mistake. My father would never. But Mr. Anderson interrupted, firm. There is no mistake, Christopher. Your father was very clear. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel my brother's rage like fire, threatening to consume the entire room. Catherine reached for his arm, whispering something sharp in his ear, her knuckles white. And me? I just sat there, stunned. My father's final words echoed in my mind. Don't be afraid. You'll understand soon. Now I understood, but what I didn't know was that this inheritance, this unexpected crown, would become the spark that ignited a storm of betrayal, lies, and deceit, because Christopher wasn't about to lose quietly. And Catherine? She wasn't about to let go of the life she thought she'd secured. The war for my father's legacy had just begun. If you were in my place, how would you react hearing your name in the will? I had barely left the study when I heard the slam of the heavy oak door behind me. Christopher's voice followed, sharp and venomous. Victoria! I froze mid-step in the hallway. His tone wasn't brotherly, wasn't even civil. It was the sound of a man whose world had just been ripped out from under him. I turned slowly. He was storming toward me, his face flushed with fury, Catherine trailing behind him like a shadow. She looked shaken but calculating, her eyes darting between us like she was already working on her next move. What the hell was that? Christopher barked, his chest heaving. Did you know about this? Did you convince him? Convince him? I interrupted, my voice trembling, though not from guilt, from shock, from fear. Chris, I had no idea. I didn't even— Don't lie to me, he snapped, stepping closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him. Dad would never do this to me. Never. You must have manipulated him. Whispered in his ear when he was weak, when he was— Stop, I said firmly, though my throat felt like it was closing. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even want it. That only made him laugh. A bitter, hollow laugh that didn't belong to the brother I once knew. You didn't want it? Don't insult me, Victoria. You've been jealous your whole life, watching me take the spotlight, watching Dad prepare me to lead. And now you're going to stand there and pretend you're innocent? The words sliced through me. Because he was right about one thing. I had always been in his shadow, but never had I wanted revenge. I just wanted peace. Catherine finally stepped forward, her manicured hand brushing against Christopher's arm. Darling, calm down. This isn't the place. But her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, cold, glittering with a hunger that unsettled me. This wasn't just about Christopher's pride, and this was about power. And Catherine wanted it just as much as he did. Christopher jabbed a finger at me. This isn't over. Do you hear me? You don't deserve this, and I'm not going to let you take it. That company, that legacy, it's mine. His words echoed in the hallway, each one heavier than the last. I wanted to cry, to shout, to remind him that I was his sister, not his enemy. But as I looked at his face, twisted with rage, and Catherine's expression, cold and calculating, I realized something painful. Family loyalty was gone. Blood didn't matter anymore. All that mattered to them was winning. I walked past him, my shoulders stiff, refusing to let him see the tears threatening to spill. But inside, I was breaking. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the will papers Mr. Anderson had given me. The company's shares, the financial estate, all in my name. I should have felt powerful, triumphant even. But instead, I felt like a target painted in bright red. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the overlooked daughter. I was the heir, the chosen one. And that made me dangerous to Christopher. As I stared at the documents, my father's voice whispered again in my memory. Don't be afraid. But fear was exactly what I felt. Fear of my brother's wrath, fear of Catherine's cunning, fear of the storm I knew was about to consume us all. Because Christopher wasn't just angry, he was humiliated. And a man who's built his whole life on being the golden child will burn the world before he lets his crown slip away. And I was about to learn just how far he and Catherine were willing to go. Do you believe arrogance blinds people to reality? The days after the will reading passed in a blur, every room in the estate felt heavier, as though the walls themselves carried the echoes of Christopher's rage. The staff spoke in hushed tones, relatives avoided eye contact, and I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home. But what unsettled me most wasn't the silence. It was the whispers. Late one evening, I was coming back from the garden when I heard voices drifting from Father's old study. The door was cracked slightly, golden light spilling into the hallway. I paused, my heart racing. She doesn't deserve any of it, Christopher's voice hissed. Catherine's reply was low, coaxing, almost serpentine. Darling, calm yourself. Anger won't win this. Strategy will. My stomach tightened. Christopher slammed something, maybe a glass, maybe his fist, against the desk. It should have been mine. He promised me, Catherine. My whole life, he promised me. And now, she's the heir? Victoria? He spat my name like venom. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Catherine's heels clicked softly as she crossed the room. I could almost picture her, leaning over him, stroking his arm, whispering poison into his ear. Listen to me. If the will stands, we lose everything. But wills can be contested. Documents can be rewritten. Mistakes can be found. Or created. Christopher's voice lowered, dangerous. You're saying, forge it? A silence followed. Then Catherine's chilling reply. I'm saying we fight fire with fire. Do you want to stand aside while she parades around with your birthright? Or do you want to take back what's yours? My blood turned cold. The study fell quiet again, but my mind was screaming. They weren't just angry, they weren't just bitter. They were planning something illegal, something that could destroy me. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. When I finally reached the safety of my room, I collapsed onto the bed, my hands trembling. This wasn't a sibling rivalry anymore. This was war. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside felt like a threat. I replayed their words over and over. Documents can be rewritten. Mistakes can be created. Christopher's rage was dangerous, but Catherine's cunning was worse. She was the mind behind the operation, the hand guiding his fury. And together, they were lethal. I thought about going to Mr. Anderson, telling him what I'd overheard. But what proof did I have? Just whispers through a cracked door? No one would believe me over Christopher, the golden child, and Catherine, with her perfect smile and polished charm. Still, I knew I had to be careful. Very careful. The next morning, Christopher didn't look at me once during breakfast, but Catherine did. Her eyes lingered on me, sharp and unreadable, her lips curling into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. It sent a shiver down my spine. She knew. Somehow she knew I'd heard them. Or maybe she just suspected. Either way, that smile wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. I realized then that my father's legacy wasn't just a gift. It was a burden, one that put a target squarely on my back. And if I wanted to survive this storm, I couldn't just sit quietly anymore. I had to be ready, because Christopher and Catherine weren't going to stop until they had taken everything from me, even if it meant destroying me in the process. Would you confront them immediately, or gather evidence in silence? It started with small things: a missing file from father's study, a document that had been neatly stacked in Mr. Anderson's briefcase suddenly out of order, even a signature that didn't look quite right on one of the estate's bank papers. At first, I thought it was paranoia. My mind was still reeling from what I'd overheard, and maybe I was seeing ghosts where there were none. But deep down, I knew better. Christopher and Catherine had started moving. One evening, Mr. Anderson called me to his office downtown. His expression was tight, uneasy. "Victoria, I wanted you to see something." He spread out a document on the polished oak desk. I leaned forward. It was a copy of Father's will, but something about it was wrong. The lettering looked slightly off. Father's signature, normally so fluid and confident, seemed shakier, uneven. And there were new clauses, lines I didn't remember hearing at the reading. My stomach dropped. "This isn't the version I read to the family," Mr. Anderson said grimly. "This surfaced yesterday. An anonymous party sent it to the probate court, claiming it was the final amendment to your father's will. I didn't need to ask who the anonymous party was." My brother's voice rang in my ears. "Do you want to take back what's yours?" I clenched my fists, fury and fear colliding in my chest. "It's fake." "You know it's fake," Mr. Anderson nodded. "I believe it is. But proving that in court is another matter. Your brother and his wife are powerful. They'll have resources, experts who can argue that this signature is genuine." My throat went dry. "So what do?" He sighed. "We prepare. We gather every piece of evidence we can to prove your father's true intentions. Letters, recordings, business notes, anything that shows consistency with the original will. And Victoria," he paused, his voice lowering, "you need to be ready. They won't play fair." That night, I pored over every letter my father had ever written me, every email, every memo he'd left in the company files. Each word felt like a lifeline, proof that he believed in me. But even as I worked, a hollow ache grew inside me. Christopher was my brother, blood of my blood. Yet here he was, forging documents, twisting father's memory just to strip me of what had been entrusted to me. And Catherine? Oh, Catherine. I could see her fingerprints all over this. She was the mastermind, the puppeteer pulling at Christopher's wounded pride. Days later, the confrontation came. We crossed paths in the estate's library. Christopher stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, his jaw tight. Catherine lounged nearby, flipping through a book she wasn't reading. "So," Christopher said, his voice calm, too calm. "I hear you've been busy, digging, preparing. Afraid we might take what's yours." I met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "It's not mine. It's father's, and I won't let either of you corrupt his name." Catherine closed the book softly and stood, her heels clicking against the floor. She smiled, that infuriating smile, the one that dripped with superiority. "Victoria, you're so dramatic. No one is corrupting anything. We're simply ensuring the rightful heir gets what he deserves." "By rewriting history?" I shot back. "By faking signatures and inventing clauses?" For a moment, Christopher's mask slipped. His eyes burned with rage. But Catherine touched his arm, steadying him, her voice silky smooth. "Careful, darling," she whispered, though loud enough for me to hear. "She's baiting you." Then she looked at me, her smile widening. "This is just the beginning, Victoria. You think a few papers will save you? You have no idea how far we're willing to go." Her words hung in the air like poison. And I realized then that the fight for my father's legacy wasn't going to be about justice or truth. It was going to be about survival. Who would you trust in a situation like this, and family, friends, or no one? The days that followed felt like walking through a battlefield I couldn't yet see. Every glance from Christopher, every smirk from Catherine carried unspoken threats. And yet, I knew I couldn't face them head on. Not yet. I needed allies. The first came unexpectedly. Daniel, one of father's oldest business associates, stopped me after a board meeting. He was in his 60s, his salt and pepper hair framing sharp, intelligent eyes. "Victoria," he said quietly, pulling me aside, "don't let them rattle you. Your father trusted you for a reason. I can help." I blinked, taken aback. "Why?" "You've known Christopher for years. You've worked with him." Daniel gave a small, humorless smile. "I've also seen the man he's become. Impulsive, angry, vulnerable to influence." His gaze hardened. "Catherine has him by the throat and everyone can see it. But your father, he chose you because he knew you wouldn't be swayed. Don't underestimate that his words struck deep. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of strength return. Daniel agreed to share company files, meeting notes, and records that could support my case if Christopher tried to push the forged will through. He wasn't just offering guidance, he was offering protection. But Daniel wasn't the only shadow moving behind the scenes. One night, as I sat in my room, combing through old letters, there was a knock at my door. It was Grace, one of the estate staff who had worked for my family since I was a child. Her eyes darted nervously down the hall before she slipped inside and closed the door. "Miss Victoria," she whispered urgently, "you need to be careful. I've seen Mrs. Catherine in Father's study after midnight. Papers spread out on the desk. She doesn't know I've noticed, but it's not right. She's hiding something." My pulse quickened. Grace wasn't the type to exaggerate. If she had seen Catherine tampering with documents, then it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. I grabbed her hand. "Grace, will you testify if it comes to that? Will you stand by me?" She hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "They're powerful, miss, and cruel, but yes, for your father's memory, I will." Her loyalty moved me to tears. Even in this house, where betrayal lurked behind every smile, there were still people willing to fight for the truth. The next morning, I felt different, stronger. But Christopher and Catherine weren't blind. They sensed the shift. At breakfast, Christopher's voice cut through the clinking of silverware. "Planning something, sister?" I froze mid-bite. "What are you talking about?" His lips curled into a smirk. "Don't play innocent. I see you whispering with Daniel. I see the staff sneaking glances your way. Do you think you can build an army against me?" Catherine placed a delicate hand on his arm, but her eyes were locked on me, cold, calculating. "Victoria, you should be careful. Aligning yourself with the wrong people could backfire. Daniel has his own agenda. And servants?" She chuckled softly. "They'll say anything for the right price." I set my fork down, meeting their stares. "Funny, that's exactly what I was thinking about you two." The room went silent. For a brief second, Christopher's jaw tightened, and Catherine's smile faltered. It was small, but it was a victory. Later that evening, Daniel called me. His voice was steady, but urgent. "Victoria, I've been reviewing the forged will. There's a detail they missed, something sloppy. It could be our key." My heart pounded. At last, a crack in their armor? But even as hope swelled inside me, I knew the war was far from over. Christopher and Catherine weren't going to back down, and I had to be ready for whatever shadows they sent next. Do you think my plan to play weak was smart or risky? The forged will was officially entered into probate court 2 weeks later. I remember the way my heart thudded as I sat in the polished oak courtroom, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on me. Reporters lined the benches, pens ready to capture every scandalous detail of the Hastings family feud. To them, this wasn't about justice. It was entertainment. Christopher walked in first, wearing a custom-tailored navy suit, his expression calm but smug. Catherine trailed beside him, elegant and radiant, as if she were attending a gala instead of a legal hearing. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, her head tilted in that way that made her look both demure and dangerous. And then there was me, alone. At least that's what they wanted the world to see. Daniel sat behind me, his presence solid, reassuring. Grace, too, had come, though she kept to the shadows, her eyes darting nervously whenever Catherine glanced her way. The judge entered, the room rose, and the storm began. Christopher's lawyer presented the amended will with dramatic flair, sliding the papers across the table as if revealing some long-lost treasure. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "this document represents Mr. Hastings' true final wishes. It clearly states that the estate and company are to pass to his eldest son, Christopher Hastings." My stomach twisted as I read the forged lines again, each word a knife in my father's memory. Then my attorney, a sharp woman named Claire, rose to her feet. "Your Honor, this so-called amendment is nothing but a fabrication, and we will prove it." Catherine leaned forward, her lips brushing Christopher's ear. He smirked, clearly enjoying the performance. The judge allowed the case to proceed, setting dates for formal hearings. The press erupted the moment we left the courtroom, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in my face. "Victoria, did you forge the original will yourself?" one reporter shouted. "Is it true your father didn't trust you with the company?" another asked. Before I could answer, Catherine stepped forward, her voice honey-sweet. "Victoria's under a lot of pressure. I think we should all give her space. After all, it's not easy to face the truth." The crowd murmured, snapping photos of her sympathetic smile. I burned inside. She had turned the narrative in seconds, painting me as the desperate, bitter younger sibling clinging to power. That night, I locked myself in Father's study, my hands trembling as I lit the fireplace. I stared at his portrait on the wall, his stern but kind eyes watching me. "What do I do, Father?" I whispered. "How do I fight them when they twist everything into lies?" And then, almost as if in answer, I noticed something. One of Father's old journals had slipped slightly out of the shelf. I pulled it free, the leather cover cracked with age. Inside, I found page after page of his thoughts. About the company, about us, about me. And on one page, written just weeks before his death, were the words, "Victoria is ready. She is the future of this family. My son has lost his way. I love him, but I cannot entrust him with what I've built." Tears blurred my vision. Proof. Not legal proof, perhaps, but something more powerful. Father's own voice, unfiltered and undeniable. The next day, I showed it to Daniel. He leaned back, whistling softly. "If we can authenticate this journal, it could be devastating for their case." But he also warned me, "Be careful. If Christopher and Catherine realize you found this, they'll stop at nothing to destroy it. And you." The storm wasn't just gathering anymore. It was here. And I had to decide if I was brave enough to stand in its path. Have you ever seen someone exposed for lying? How did it feel? It happened at a charity gala. The Hastings Foundation held one every year in Father's honor, and this year was the first without him. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and gold accents, but to me it felt hollow. Everything about it was staged, a performance to show the world our family was still whole. Christopher played his role perfectly, shaking hands, clinking glasses, his smile polished for the cameras. Catherine was dazzling in an emerald gown, her laughter carrying through the crowd like wind chimes. And me? I wore black, quiet, reserved, mourning more than just my father. I should have known they wouldn't let the night pass quietly. Halfway through the evening, as guests mingled around the stage, Catherine took the microphone. Her voice was soft at first, a ripple over the music. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, as we celebrate my beloved father-in-law's legacy, we also face the future of Hastings Enterprises, and I believe transparency is important in times like these. My chest tightened. I knew that tone. Catherine's lips curved into a sympathetic smile, her gaze sweeping the crowd before landing on me. Some of you may have heard rumors about a will dispute. Gasps echoed. Guests turned toward me, whispers igniting like wildfire. I froze in place. Catherine continued smoothly. I don't wish to speak ill of family, but unfortunately, Victoria has struggled with the reality of her father's wishes. She's clinging to fantasies, even going so far as to present questionable evidence from old journals. The crowd stirred. My blood boiled. And while I respect her grief, Catherine added sweetly, we must honor truth, not emotion. My husband was chosen to carry the torch. That's the legacy Mr. Hastings wanted. Her words cut deeper than knives. It wasn't just a personal attack. It was a public assassination of my credibility. The room blurred as my pulse thundered in my ears. For a moment, I thought I'd collapse. But then, something shifted inside me. A voice, strong and clear, rose above the fear. No more silence. I stepped forward. Funny you should talk about truth, Catherine, I said, my voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. Because the truth is, you've been sneaking into Father's study after midnight, tampering with documents, forging his signature. Grace saw you. Shall I bring her up here to testify? The crowd gasped. Catherine's perfect mask cracked, just for an instant before she smoothed it back into place. You're delusional, she hissed, the microphone trembling slightly in her hand. You'll say anything to destroy us. No, I said firmly, my eyes sweeping the crowd. I don't need to destroy you. You've done that yourselves. Father's journals exist. They prove he trusted me with the company, not Christopher. And if anyone doubts me, I turned to Daniel, who was already pulling a leather-bound book from his briefcase. We have them authenticated. The ballroom erupted. Guests whispered frantically, some moving toward me, others away from Catherine. The fracture was visible now, lines drawn, loyalties shaken. Christopher stormed forward, yanking the mic from Catherine. His voice thundered. Enough! Victoria, you will regret this. I met his glare, unflinching. No, Christopher. For the first time in your life, you're going to regret underestimating me. The music had stopped. The clinking glasses had gone silent. Every eye was on us, the perfect Hastings family shattered in the spotlight. That night, I realized the war was no longer hidden in whispers and forged documents. It was public, and there was no going back. Do you think betrayal always comes back to haunt the betrayer? The courthouse was packed, the will dispute had become front-page news, and the gallery buzzed with anticipation like a theater before the curtain rose. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but everyone knew the story would be splashed across headlines within hours. Christopher sat at the plaintiff's table, jaw tight, his lawyer whispering strategies in his ear. Catherine sat beside him, poised as ever, her expression unreadable. But I noticed her tapping fingers, the subtle twitch in her eye, cracks in her flawless performance. I sat across from them, the journals stacked neatly before me. My attorney Claire flipped through her notes with calm precision. Behind me, Daniel gave a small nod, as if reminding me I wasn't alone. The judge entered. The room hushed. Christopher's lawyer started strong. He painted me as unstable, desperate, willing to cling to falsified diary entries to override my father's wishes. He held up the forged amendment, declaring it the true and only valid will. I clenched my fists under the table. For a moment, fear threatened to choke me. What if the jury believed them? What if my father's name was forever tarnished by their lies? Then Claire stood. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice steady and clear. The so-called amendment is a fabrication. We have handwriting experts prepared to testify that the signature is forged, and we also have the decedent's own words, written in his personal journals, where he clearly states his intention for Victoria Hastings to inherit the company. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as she held up the leather-bound book. The judge motioned for the expert witness. A gray-haired handwriting analyst took the stand, comparing signatures projected onto the screen. He pointed out the discrepancies, the shaky lines, the unnatural curves, the hesitation marks. This, he said firmly, is not the signature of Mr. Hastings. Christopher's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury shifted in their seats, eyes narrowing. Then it was Catherine's turn on the stand. Claire's questions were sharp, slicing through her polished demeanor. Mrs. Hastings, can you explain why Grace, a housekeeper of 20 years, saw you in Mr. Hastings' study past midnight 2 weeks before his death? Catherine's lips pressed thin. I was organizing papers for the memorial. Papers? Or signatures? Claire pressed. Catherine's composure faltered. She glanced at Christopher, who gave her a warning glare. But the jury saw it. They saw the fear. Finally, Claire revealed the masterstroke. Your Honor, we've had the journals authenticated by 2 independent experts. Not only are they genuine, but they contain entries written just days before Mr. Hastings' death. One reads, and I quote, Christopher has disappointed me. He is reckless, blinded by greed. Victoria is my only true heir. The words hung heavy in the courtroom. Catherine paled. Christopher slammed his fist against the table. Lies, he shouted, his voice echoing. She's manipulating everyone. But it was too late. The jury had seen enough. The judge banged his gavel. Order. The verdict came swiftly. The amendment was declared invalid. The estate and company were rightfully mine. Christopher and Catherine's attempt at fraud was exposed, their credibility shattered in front of the world. As the judge adjourned, Catherine buried her face in her hands. Christopher stood frozen, rage radiating off him. For the first time in his life, he looked small. I stood tall, the journals clutched against my chest. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But inside, I felt Father's presence, proud, vindicated. The masks had fallen, and the truth was finally free. What's more powerful to you, money or respect? The day after the trial, I returned to Hastings Enterprises. The building loomed tall against the city skyline, its glass windows reflecting the morning sun. For years, it had been Father's kingdom, and then Christopher's playground of arrogance. But as I walked through the doors, head held high, it finally felt like mine. Employees lined the lobby, whispering as I passed. Some offered tentative smiles, others looked relieved. They had lived under Christopher's reign of intimidation and Catherine's scheming charm. Now, their eyes shone with hope. I paused at the front of the atrium, where Father's portrait hung. His eyes seemed to follow me, steady and calm. I did it, Father, I whispered. They tried to erase me, but your faith in me was stronger than their greed. That afternoon, I held a meeting with the board. For the first time, I sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Christopher's chair sat empty. The weight of the moment pressed against me, but it wasn't crushing. It was empowering. I'm not here to cling to the past, I told them, my voice firm. I'm here to honor my father's vision and lead this company into the future with integrity. There will be no more lies, no more manipulation. We rise together or we don't rise at all. The board members nodded, some even clapping quietly. A sense of unity filled the room, a unity Christopher never inspired. Outside the corporate world, the fallout was swift. Christopher and Catherine's betrayal made headlines for weeks. Former friends abandoned them. Invitations vanished. Their names, once synonymous with power, became synonymous with scandal. They had tried to strip me of my legacy, but in the end, they had stripped themselves of dignity. As for me, I didn't revel in their downfall. I didn't need revenge. The truth had already done the work. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, on carrying Father's dream forward. Daniel stood by my side through it all, loyal as ever. Sometimes I wondered if our bond could blossom into something deeper, but for now, his friendship was more than enough. One evening, weeks later, I returned to the family estate. The air was crisp, the gardens blooming with late spring flowers. I walked into Father's study, the same room where Christopher and Catherine had plotted their deceit, the same place where Father had written his last words. The journals sat on the desk, their leather covers worn, their pages filled with his thoughts, fears, and hopes. I traced my fingers over the ink. Reading his words again, I realized something profound. This fight was never truly about money, property, or even the company. It was about proving to myself and to the world that I was not the forgotten daughter, not the shadow to Christopher's golden child glow. I was my father's true heir, not because of the will, but because I had chosen courage over silence. That night, as I closed the journals for the last time, I felt a peace I hadn't known since Father's death. The storms had passed. A new dawn had arrived. I looked at my reflection in the study's glass window, not the timid girl overshadowed by her brother, but the woman who had stood against betrayal, deceit, and greed, and won. For the first time, I didn't just see Victoria Hastings. I saw the legacy of my father living on, and I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.